Love 'em or hate 'em, certain books have that extra something that makes them divisive among the reading community. Today I've got a selection of books that I've recently read that teeter on that line between love it or hate it. Let me know which side of the scale you fall on if you've read any of these picks. Before the Coffee Gets Cold. This is a book of vignettes from a cafe that allows its patrons to briefly time travel. This is a work of translated fiction from Japanese, and it follows the stories of patrons as well as the cafe workers themselves. Though very loose in plot, this is a story of second chances and how you could change your past and your future with just 10 minutes to do things differently. The people I think who will love this book are people who want philosophical fiction that is on the lighter side. Ultimately, it's also feel-good fiction. It's very hopeful in tone, and I think that it will really appeal to people who are in that headspace and looking for something to lift their spirits. One of the other pluses of this book is that it has a really nice atmosphere. It's set in a very cozy, kind of out of the way coffee shop. You have a group of eclectic characters who all have different backgrounds who come together, and their plot lines eventually intertwine as you get to know them throughout the book. And so it has that air of meeting and getting to know a group of people that feel like friends by the end. Now, I think that there will also be a large group of people who don't like this book because it's one of those feel-good fictions that likes to hit you over the head with its messaging. Kind of similar to books like The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, another very similar kind of hopeful, uplifting, reflective story. Another aspect is that while this book does center around the cafe having literal time travel, the time travel itself is not a huge part of the book. So if you are in the sci-fi time travel mood, or that's what you're looking to get out of this book, I think you'll feel a little disappointed. As for me, which side of the scale do I fall on with Before the Coffee Gets Cold? Personally, I really didn't like this book. Partly because it felt kind of shallow to me that these characters who have gone through these distressing events can resolve it in a really quick 10-minute conversation. And also because unfortunately I did feel like I was being lectured at due to the hammering nature of the messaging. But on the other hand, I remembered really liking The Midnight Library, which does have a very similar feel, only maybe more complex in plot and more developed in the plot structure. So perhaps that's what made the difference between the two for me personally, but I'm going to have to give this one a thumbs down. Bride is a book that I would classify as an urban fantasy. It follows our main character Misery, who was born into the vampire world as semi-royalty, as to someone important, but she's also kind of a huge outcast. Her only confidant is her human friend, and when her friend goes mysteriously missing, she follows her trail to the leader of the werewolf clan. She's desperate to find out more about where her best friend went, and so she agrees to an arranged marriage with this guy because essentially he's the last link to her disappearance. This book is absolutely for people who want a snappy romance that's full of fun tropes. If you love a will they won't they vibe, it's also perfect for you. And of course, I can't forget to stress the importance of good werewolf and vampire representation in mainstream literature. It's so hard to find, and if you are looking for a good fantasy, urban fantasy with vampires and werewolves, this will be it for you. Now, knowing the author, I know that this book is also definitely not for a lot of people, and especially this specific genre and type of novel I know will not appeal to a large group of people. And that's mainly because this book comes off very fanfiction-y, and if you've read a lot of fanfiction, it's written with a particular style and pacing and characterization between relationships that is just so specific, you could clock it from a mile away. I think it's also not for people who like their romances with an extra something in the plot. The overall world building is pretty shallow in terms of the politics and the tensions between vampires and werewolves and humans, and so if that's something you need to be the driving motor behind a good romance, I think you'll be disappointed there. Now, personally, did I love or hate Bride? Surprisingly, I really liked it. I think that reading a lot of times doesn't have to be super deep and inspiring and meaningful all the time. Sometimes it can just be really fun and entertaining. This for me was pure entertainment. It was a lot of nostalgia. This was honestly just a really fun time, so I think if you like the tropes, this will probably really appeal to you. But if you're looking for something moodier, a little grittier, something a little more serious, this probably won't be up your alley. The Thick and the Lean. This is set in a dystopian future where eating has become a very taboo and indulgent act. act. Meanwhile, sex has actually been replaced as a more meditative act. So food and eating and sex have kind of switched places in terms of which is taboo and which is just mundane. We follow two characters, one who was born into the cultier sect of society that really holds very strict standards against eating for pleasure. And we follow another character who was born really poor into this society and gets an opportunity to elevate her social status by getting into a really elite college. These two women's lives are loosely tied together by a book that they both come across called The Kitchen Girl. The book itself follows a servant who works in this medieval kitchen, and she one day gains the notice of the king. This book is for those of you who like the weird intersection between literary fiction, sci-fi, and horror. Overall, I would just call this speculative fiction, but those three specifically have this beautiful mixed intersection that can really produce something that is just weird and funky and fun. If you're also somebody that likes to have deeper discussions and to really have your fiction have larger implications in society, this book does go into a lot of discussions on things like climate change, big corporations and their effects on the everyday person's life, the indulgence of pleasure, and also how that relates to religious zealous, and also how that can be viewed differently between different socioeconomic classes. If any of those topics kind of appeal to you, this book is a really great jumping off point for that kind of discussion. Now, I can also see why this might not be for everybody, because unfortunately it is split out into three very distinct POVs and stories. Truly, this is more like three completely separate short stories put into one. And so it is quite hard to follow through to the end of the novel, especially when you don't really see how they all tie together until that last quarter of the book. And if you thought this book was more about food, I think you will also be highly disappointed. Now for me, The Thick and the Lean was definitely on the love it side of my scale. This was actually one of my anticipated books for 2025, and so when I read it and actually really enjoyed it, I was obviously thrilled. Thankfully, all three stories did kind of appeal to me. They're very different, but in a fun, contrasting way. You can see how their stories both mirror and diverge from each other, and then how they ultimately come together. And I think that the author had some really, really interesting takes and plots that reflected more of modern society than we thought. 5 Star Stranger is a book that dives into the gig economy, and it follows our unnamed narrator who is basically a hireable stranger or character. For a price, he will be anybody and anything that you want for the day. And while he is excellent at his job and he takes great pride in his work, his newest client is really forcing him to reevaluate his choices of career, which unfortunately includes being a pretend hired dad to a little girl for several years. And this little girl actually thinks that he is her father. This book, strangely enough, I think would appeal to people who are looking for that Patrick Bateman type of character, that level of almost psychotic precision that is present in Patrick Bateman is definitely an aspect of this character. And while I don't think that makes him very likable, I certainly think it makes him an especially interesting character. This is also certainly rooted in the weird fiction category. We have a very strange, unlikable guy who just gets himself into these weird situations with people who hire him for their own strange desires. And he can totally pull off the part with this very unnatural detachment. In my own notes I left for this book, one thing I wrote down was that a part of the book was like rotting fruit for a Freudian fly. And that leads me into my next point, where I don't think you will like this book if you don't like books with less plot and more focus on character study and messaging into the character itself. We really deep dive into this guy's relationship with his mother, his relationship with other people, his views on what the human psyche and relationship is. With that being the main focus of the book, there is very little true plot. Also, if you don't like the main character along those lines because it's a character study, you'll probably also hate this book. He is kind of unlikable. He's really bland, but also very hateable at the same time. As for 5 Star Strangers, This book for me, I would say it's interesting, but ultimately I will probably never reread it, nor would I readily recommend it to anybody. So I definitely fall on the more hated side of the scale. When a book has as little plot as this one, it's more focused on the character study itself. What I've found is that the way the author ties up the ending is really important to me. This book to me, unfortunately, felt like it was really on the nose with the ending. And I personally did not enjoy the way we wrapped up this character study and our relationship and brief time spent with the main character. So even though I found the journey of the story and reading it entertaining, I don't think I walked away from it with a positive view. Heaven is our last book, and it follows our unnamed narrator, who is a teen boy who is being every day perpetually physically and emotionally bullied by a group of people at his school. And throughout the story, he begins this unexpected friendship with this girl in his class who is also suffering from similar bullying fates. This is a translated work from Japanese, and I think it's really for people who are looking for discussions on true philosophies and philosophical concepts, especially in the forms of like characters. I think it's also for people who like a more raw and gritty coming of age story that isn't on the inspiring side. Something that's more closer to reality, or something that feels more reflective of, you know, real life bullying stories. And I've seen a lot of people say that they actually like the unsatisfaction of those loose ends that are left in the story. So if you're somebody who kind of likes the reality and doesn't like the fakeness of like a happily ever after, this will be a perfect book for you. Now, why I don't think some people like this book and why I don't think it's easy to recommend out this book is because it is an extremely dark and graphic and disturbing and very discouraging book. It's super dismal, and it is not a great thing to read if you're not in a good headspace. It automatically inspires a lot of strong emotions and feelings and a lot of discomfort. Now, with all that being said, I think that you could probably guess that I did not like this book. And I'll start with the fact that I've personally always disliked books where the characters and the plots only serve to further the author's messaging and nothing else. Not just that the characters represent something, that it has a bigger message. No, like the characters and the plot are only there to deliver a message. They do not have their own lives, really. They do not have a purpose of being there besides to serve a point. Those are the type of books that I've always had beef with, I've always personally disliked, and unfortunately that's the case here. The other thing I disliked is that because this is such a philosophical book, you do ponder on your own personal philosophies when you're reading this. And I do have to say that the ending message I got from this book is that there is beauty in the ordinary as long as you can shift your perspective. However, that doesn't align with my personal philosophies given everything that had happened in the book. The gruesome and graphic bullying tied up with this very kind of bland ending message about thinking positive thoughts. I think this is a thing where if you have very strong personal philosophies and morals when it comes to these things, you will probably feel annoyed coming out of this book. Maybe not necessarily hating it, but I think it might annoy you as much as it annoyed me. We've come to the end of our list of divisive books. Make sure to let me know if you've read any of these books and which side of the scale you sit on with them. And if you've had any books that you've noticed might be very divisive and might be interesting to discuss and read. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you all. Have a lovely rest of your day. Bye-bye.